Hey, you. Yes, you, the person who just hit play on that device, the person that's listening to my voice right now. Do you feel stuck in your life? Do you feel like you're living your life in a way that's compromising all your dreams and wishes, the ones that you had at one time? Do you know how much more capable you are, but somehow you can't seem to tap into that potential? Then wow, is this the episode for you? Stay tuned because this episode is all about tapping into that potential, and my guest is someone you've got to meet. My name is Will.
And I'm Karen.
And unlike Mulder and Scully,
we both want to believe.
So we've embarked on a journey of discovery.
We've talked to people deeply entrenched in the spiritual and metaphysical world.
We've thrown ourselves into weird and wonderful experiences. I even joined a coven of witches.
And wait, you joined a coven?
Yep, all in the interest of finding something,
anything,
that will prove that there's something beyond this physical,
three-dimensional world we all live in.
This is the Skeptic Metaphysicians. Welcome to another episode of the Skeptic Metaphysicians. I'm Will, your host for today. Unfortunately, Karen won't be with us this time around, but just because I'm on my own doesn't mean that I'm not super well accompanied, because that could not be further from the truth. Joining me today is a practical mystic. She's an intuitive life coach with a mission to help everyone achieve a life that's lived to the fullest. So if you feel like you've hit a ceiling on your potential and want to break through it, Nicole Frolick is going to help all of us remove the blocks that are getting in our way. Welcome to the show, Nicole.
Thank you, Will. It's so good to be here with you guys finally.
Yeah, we've been chatting back and forth through social media. I tell people all the time that the reels that you put up on there, I just told you before we started recording, you're talking directly to me. Everyone who listens to the show knows how much I've wanted to reach my potential, how much I've wanted to have that spiritual awakening and all that kind of stuff. But for some reason, I'm holding myself back. Now, we've talked a lot about it on the show, but I'm excited to finally have the expert on the show that's going to help me break through all of that nonsense. Right?
Awesome. Breaking through ceilings is something I love to do.
No doubt about it. Nicole, so that we can level set, how'd you get into the spiritual or metaphysical industry, for lack of a better word?
Well, I mean, I've always been pulled into alternative health and also metaphysics. Meditation was something I started doing when I was a teenager without me even realizing that's what I was doing. And so it was just something that I naturally gravitated towards. When I was in my late 20s, I don't know if you were on his podcast or you had him on, but Michael Philpott, he's out of Toronto, Canada. I met him. He was doing tarot readings, which he still is. And this is in my late 20s, and I found him, and that just kind of opened me up more. I started doing Reiki. It's like, I think the best way to put it is I got into this by walking the pathless path. And the pathless path seems very arbitrary to most, and it should, because there are no definitions, there are no linear directions. It's literally being guided. And as you walk it, you are in a way creating your own unique path. But the only way you do that is by not knowing where you're going. And ultimately, the general feeling is, I feel lost. That's how you know you're on the pathless path. And so I think by feeling very lost at different times in my life is how I got to where I am today. It was not because I had a 10-year plan or, all these goals set in line. In fact, a lot of those things have shifted and changed and morphed along the way. So I would say the pathless path is how I got into all of this.
I mean, that's a great term, pathless path. I don't think I've ever heard it before. And
your mouth is walking the pathless path right now.
Yeah, my mouth, my brain, my body, everything about me is on the pathless path. But it gives a specific image that is perfect. So that's a great way to explain it. Now, you mentioned something that I have to kind of go back to. You said you didn't even realize that you were doing meditation when you were younger, when you first went into it. What does that mean? How does that?
So when I was 16, I did an exchange program in Europe, and I lived in Switzerland for 3 months. And while I was traveling with my exchange family, they took me to a bunch of different cathedrals. And I was raised Catholic, but I was never really into Catholicism. I had a kind of a rebellion against religion. And I was more interested in things that weren't so confining or using fear to manipulate you. And That's not to say that the religion doesn't have beautiful lessons and attributes to it, but for me, it just wasn't resonating. And so when I was in Europe, I found myself in some of these cathedrals, and they were sometimes playing like Gregorian chants. And when I got back to Toronto, I went to like a CD store, and looking for something completely different, I stumbled across Gregorian chants, and I was like, you know what? This is what I want. And so I started listening to it while I was in the bath. And I started to realize I'm going somewhere. I'm going somewhere. And I found myself at such a state of peace. I was so calm, and I really liked how I was feeling. And my mind would just go to different places. And I literally felt like I was not in my body at certain times. And so I started to do that not just in the bath, but sometimes like before bed. And before I knew it, I'm like, is this what meditation is? You know? So that's kind of like how that all started, was with
Right.
Gregorian chants, because I
Well,
found them so it's like there's kind of like a mystical feeling with it that really, I don't know. I think I've had a past life for sure in Europe where I must have been somehow remembering those Gregorian chants, and it just spoke to my soul.
mm. Well, you bring up a good point because meditation, a lot of people think it's, you sit with your legs crossed somewhere with your fingers in lotus position and you try to still your mind completely. But meditation could really be all kinds of different things. Like was it transcendental meditation where you come up with a mantra and you just say the mantra over and over and over again. There's the Gregorian chants that you just mentioned. There is that mindfulness, those apps, the Calm and the Headspace, that kind of stuff that's meant specifically for mindfulness and for clearing of the mind or focus. But really, you could take meditation in all different directions. Like some people, mowing the lawn is their meditation. They just kind of zone out and they enjoy that. That's really important to note because a lot of people think that it's a certain way. I know, Karen, I know you're listening to this, and I know you're beating me up already because I hear you talking about the fact Karen has a difficult time meditating. I'm gonna keep trying to tell her to just focus on something, find her meditation. So hopefully we'll find it at some point. But
I was going to say to Karen that, there are no right or wrong ways to meditate. And if you can do breath work, focusing just on the breath, because that produces the most amount of DMT, right? Our lungs produce the most amount of DMT. And so whenever you can focus on your breathing and just get into a sequence that feels rhythmic for you, then that can help you. And that in itself is a meditation. You may even have your eyes open, but it's still meditative. And, I produce a ton of guided meditations. I produce one every month. And I like to go outside the box of what people think are meditations. And I like to use different music and really create a lot of different visuals. And so I think it's okay. Like I've listened to really upbeat music that gets me into a very high vibe place through my meditations. So I think it's important to, or at least for even Karen, anyone else who's listening to this, who's struggling with meditation, like you just got to find what works for you, and don't feel like because you're not doing it the way everyone else is, or what works for you isn't like everyone else, that it's wrong. It's just, all the power to you if you can find something that's really unique.
right. No, absolutely. And it's interesting that you mentioned breath work because that's the one thing that Karen said really sent her out of her body, that she just really resonated with that very deeply. And I did stumble on your guided meditations, and I'm going to buy them all because I can't wait. I do meditate every day, but always looking for that different take on meditations. So these look like they're going to be a lot of fun. So I'm looking forward to this. So let's get back to the topic at hand because we fell down a rabbit hole as we always do. But reaching potential, what typically have you found to be the cause of someone not reaching their potential?
Fear. It's
What
the
are
most
people afraid of?
I mean, there's so many different facets to fear, but truly, I think it's fear of actually being more than what you think you are. One of the things that I started to discover probably in my very early 30s was how limiting my mind was and how much that was dictating how I was living my life, the choices I was making, and how that would either open or close doors for me. And a lot of it had to do with a belief, it was a belief system that was very limiting. And I didn't realize I was so limited. Like I would say no to things just for the sake of saying no sometimes. And I didn't, it was a very unconscious thing. I had to like stop myself and realize like, why am I saying no to this? Or why did I just believe I can't do that? And I think the big thing for me that really shifted was really understanding how powerful our mind is. And I know like we hear that a lot, like the mind is one of the most powerful tools that we have to use. But until you actually stop and observe your own mind and the thoughts and beliefs that are dictating your whole reality, because our beliefs are what create the frequency that then produce the reality that we perceive. So it really starts to go back to our belief system. And once you find out how to transform the beliefs from something that's very limiting into something that's very open to all possibilities, and I think that's the big key, is that I had to learn how to not be so limiting in specific outcomes. Like I, al- I was I still am, but I've always been like a type A personality. And so I liked to like, have control over a lot of things. And I've gotten a lot better at allowing others to have control and to listen and to like, be like, oh, you know what, that is actually good at. Let's do that. But before, especially through like high school, even elementary school, high school and university in my 20s, I was very rigid. And if I had a goal in mind, I believed that that was the best way and that was the way I needed to go. And I just closed off all other possibilities that would have bigger and better potentials, not even realizing that's what I was doing. And so I feel like, when it comes down to it, I feared that I really wasn't even good enough to actually deserve all of those things. And so fear of not feeling like not being worthy, like maybe like, I think one of the fears that I was always afraid of without even realizing I was afraid of it was that people would see how unworthy I actually am. Cause I put on this, oh, I've got it all together. I can do this. I was super athletic. I got great grades through all school. I worked my butt off. So I always on the outside seemed to have everything together. But like I said, walking the pathless path and feeling super lost is how I got to where I am. But it was the complete opposite of what I needed. But my mind thought, no, you just have to have it all figured out, be rigid, show everyone you got it figured out and you're going to be fine. And no one will figure the truth out. And even I wouldn't even figure the truth out. But of course, life has different plans for us and certain journeys start to take place.
Like the typical imposter syndrome, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So then what was it that launched your spiritual awakening? Or was there a particular thing that actually happened?
I've had a couple, I've had varying points of my awakening happen, but there's been some really big moments. One of them was when I took a 1-year sabbatical off work when I was 31. I decided to quit my job. I was living in the Cayman Islands and I said, let me just quit my job and go backpacking by myself through Costa Rica and Panama. And I did that for a couple of months. Yeah. And I did it by starting off with a 10-day silent meditation retreat. And then I was like, you know what? From there, I'm making no plans. Wherever I feel guided to go, I'm just going to go with the flow. Like that's my mission because I have to always have everything planned out. And so this really opened me up. So in that 10-day silent meditation, I had an experience on day 4 where I was able to finally bypass all of the pain that my body was in from trying to sit and meditate for a total of 11 hours a day, not right after each other, but throughout the day, there'd be a total of 11 hours of meditating and my body was very inflexible. I couldn't sit upright. I couldn't sit legs crossed without my feet falling asleep, my ankles hurting, my back hurting. Oh my God, my back, my hips, my knees, like everything was in pain. And finally on day 4, somehow, I don't even know how it happened, but I transcended all of that. And for the entire 2 hours, it felt like 10 minutes. I was out of my body. I was so at peace with who I was. I didn't want to change anything about me. And I felt myself just as energy. I didn't have a body anymore. And so I remembered that feeling when I got back into my body and they ended it. It was very distinct to me that I had returned home somewhere. And really, it was home to who I truly am and the connection that we all ultimately have with our creator. And I started to cry unstoppably. And I realized how much I had longed for it without even knowing I was longing for that connection and that reminder that I am so much more than the limiting ideas and beliefs that I have of myself. And so when I started to do that, everything started to shift from that moment. And I hated yoga. And it just seemed like every town I went into, I would meet someone who wanted me to do yoga with them. And I'm like, oh God. And so I did yoga with someone in the jungles that was right near the ocean. It was so beautiful. And I had the most incredible experience with it. So different from all the other experiences I had with yoga. And when I had a different experience, I had to ask myself, why was this so different from my other ones? Like, why did I hate yoga before and now I'm in love with it? Like, the only thing that could have possibly changed, other than like I was in Costa Rica and not Toronto, was that something's changed within me. And I realized that I was open to a new experience. And when I was open to a new experience, I was allowed to have a new experience. And so that really started the catalyst of me starting to stay open to all things and allow the experience to show me what I needed to know, see, feel. And that was the beginning of a very big part of my journey. It was probably the beginning of my self-love journey that, of course, is still ongoing to this day. I don't think that journey ever ends. It just gets deeper and deeper. But that's what really got me on this. And that's what spurred my book that I wrote called Inflexible Me. And it's all about that journey of how my inflexibility of my body was a result of my mind being so inflexible. And that when my mind shifted, my body shifted with me and allowed me to completely have a different experience. So I think it's so important for us to realize that if we don't stay open to other experiences, we can't have them.
And what really caught my attention is that not only the 10-day meditation retreat you did, but also the fact that you just picked up and left and went on this backpack trip. Really nice that you're able to do that. But for the average person, right, I would love to do that. I mean, it truly, as you're speaking, like my soul is crying out, like that is what I want. That is what I need. I need something like that. But I can't, I've got a job, I've got a family, I've got responsibilities.
Sure.
So what can you recommend to someone if they can't go on this incredible journey like you did?
You've got to find a way to step outside your comfort zone. You've got to find something that you can commit to that pushes you on all levels, that is going to make you uncomfortable. It's going to make you access parts of you wouldn't normally access because of the comforts that you're used to. Different surroundings, different people, different environments, anything that's new to you that allows you that process of discovery is really important. And I will say this is a process that I use a lot. I talk about this with my clients because, I do intuitive coaching and I'll use tarot and oracle sometimes. But ultimately, I like to guide my clients into understanding how they can really make the choice for themselves and understand what the decision is to be made. And whenever you're really scared to do something, it's a really good sign. We think of fear as a portal we need to run away from. But fear is actually a portal of possibility. And I say in my book that our fears are often lighthouses to our greatest potential. So if I had never pushed myself to actually become a public speaker, I would never have my podcast. I would never have my YouTube channel. I would never be doing the work that I'm doing now that I feel so much joy for. And guess what? I freaking love to talk on stage, on podcasts. Now, had you told me that maybe 10 years ago, I would have said you're crazy. I was deathly scared of, it was one of my big top 3 fears of my life. But behind it was a whole portal of potential and possibility waiting for me. And so, one, you need to look at your fears differently. Now, there are certain fears that are legitimately they're there to help keep us safe. But oftentimes we're so scared of our own potential and we're scared of failing and we're scared of the judgment that we avoid it. And there's so much waiting for you on the other side of that. Now, when it comes to big life decisions and making choices that could ultimately shift the trajectory of our life, which this particular trip absolutely shifted the trajectory of my life. You have to ask yourself one simple question when you're looking at two different choices. One, is the choice of me making this, so say it was, let's just say for instance that you actually could go on this trip and you could take maybe it was a 3-month sabbatical or something like that. Let's just say that you actually were able to do that. That was a possibility. You can say, okay, if I stay home and continue to work my job and do all those things and not go on this trip, is that choice reflecting my fears or my greatest hopes and desires? And then ask yourself, if I choose to go on this 3-month sabbatical trip, is that choice reflecting my fears or my greatest hopes and desires? And this is the question I ask myself every time I'm at a very important fork in the road where there's going to be a decision that could really alter the course of my life. And to me, it's one of the greatest ways to tune into your own intuition because it speaks to your heart. And when your heart is allowed to guide you, you will never be led astray. So asking that question is one of my greatest tools that I use with clients, myself to this day, because if you make a choice based on your fears, you're only going to create a reality that reflects more of those fears back to you. But if you make a choice that reflects your hopes and desires, then the reality will reflect more of those hopes and desires back to you.
But that fear, boy, that fear is pretty phenomenal, right? A lot of the self-help books like Eckhart Tolle, I mean, all those Seed of the Soul, they all talk about doing what's right for you, doing what's right, what's going to be for your greatest good. And perhaps taking a sabbatical from 3-month sabbatical from work might be the greatest good. But that fear is really hard to get around because there's no guarantees that taking 3 months away from your family, for example, or your job is going to give you what you need. And in fact, it might actually hurt your physical reality, right? The ego that we identify with, that we are not, but we identify with, makes it difficult for us to trust that if we just let go. I hate to use a cliche, let go and let God, but in essence, that's what you're doing, right? You're letting the universe guide you, the spirit guide you in the direction that's to your highest good or what feels right to your spirit. So is there a way? You just have to suck it up and do it. Or is there a way to actually take a look at that fear and say, it's going to be okay?
Okay, so a couple things here. One is usually we as humans will wait until our back is completely up against the wall before we actually make a change in our life.
Well, that's spiritual awakenings are all about that, right? That usually takes like some traumatic event to wake people up sometimes, me included.
Because we've been avoiding the thing that's been speaking to us for so long.
Sure. Yep, that makes sense.
And so one of the things that I tend to remind myself of is that if I want my life to be different, if I'm not happy with a part of my life or a certain way that I'm living, I have to ask myself, if I want it to be different, then I have to be different. I can't keep doing things the same way or I'm going to keep getting the same results. And at some point, you kind of meet your breaking point where you're like, you know what? I've been scared of this, but what scares me more is continuing to live with this 5-10 years down the road and still be here when I could have done something today. And I think the regret that you could have done something earlier versus much later in life, where you now have reduced how much time you can actually spend living in a happier state. I think the state of happiness is something we need to tune into in order for us to be able to overcome some of the fears. Because for me, I was like, I don't want to live as a prisoner to my own fear. I got to liberate myself from that. And fear will keep us comfortable. Fear will keep everything just as it is. And a lot of us aren't happy with the way a lot of things are in our life. So yeah, you got to just suck it up and do it. But there are certain things that you can do to take baby steps. You don't have to take one big leap all the time. You can start to make slow changes in your day-to-day that will shift the course of your life. So compounding change will eventually lead to a very big change. And I think you can start off by every day just saying, what is something I can do differently today that challenges me, that pushes me a little bit outside my comfort zone, just to shift the energy just a little.